with a thank you for everybody for being here. I know this time of year is very busy, and not just the people in the working group, but I understand we have some people probably paying close attention to this thing, and that is just great. I'd like to thank Christina, especially, but Countryside Alliance for agreeing to host this much needed work session. So I'd like to thank them publicly. We do appreciate it. The agenda for those who are just listening to us, the agenda is in the chat box. So with all that said, Leslie, would you like to make some comments and we'll get started?
No, I just hope that everybody's enjoyed their holiday so far, and thanks for tuning in during this.
Very good. Let's.
Doug, I don't see the agenda in the chat box.
Christine is looking. It is on.
If you scroll all the way up to the very tippy top, you should see from me to all panelists and attendees, good evening. If you guys can't see that, let me know because
it's there.
It's there. Okay. Lauren, can you see it?
Nope, it's not in my chat box.
I am going to replace it in the chat box because it's possible that it can't be seen by people that came in after. Let me just do that. So folks, I'm reposting both the Google link and agenda here.
Great.
Oops. All right. Okay,
There it is.
good. Okay,
Thank you.
it's a whole lot of words, but it's enough.
Now that we can see the agenda, I have it laying here on the table. Let's move into the business of this meeting so we can get things done here. The first item on the agenda is amendments from the previous meetings.
Doug, can I jump in here and in essence of what the agenda is, and as we move forward, I'd like to revisit something that we've somewhat already discussed, but yet again, I think it's pertinent, especially from the legality standpoints of things, and specifically conditional use. And I would like to have some more discussion and put back on the table somewhat of something we discussed in our previous meeting there along the lines of conditional use. And you know, in the essence of our master plan and our comprehensive plan in the county, and that being designating the AR zone as an ag use zone, I'd like to offer back up as a way forward for everything that all of us, I think, are trying to discuss here, being solar. I think we've all got different thoughts as to where to go and how it should be, what it should look like, sizes, this and that. And some of us in agriculture are scared to death and worried about competing with it. That's very important. It's very important to the people that are living in that zone. But I'd like to offer back up the way forward, the right legal way forward for us is conditional use. And I don't know that this is an appropriate time to do it, but I think it is. Because as we go forward, and as Mr. Bartlett and Leslie and some of the others have spoken to and come up with ideas that are good ideas, some of them, we might not all agree with them. I think the proper way to get there is using the conditional use.
Randy, could I ask clarification? Are you proposing a new amendment on conditional use that's different from the one that we discussed before and defeated?
I would say it could be different. Yes. I mean, we never ironed out the fact of what all was going to happen there. We just shot down conditional use.
But
That
you
could
don't
be.
actually have an amendment that you've circulated or even one that you can show us on the screen now. Is that correct?
I think that, sorry, I think if I could,
Could I just get that question answered?
well, okay. Randy, you're on mute.
Any muted.
No, Al, I do not, or Doug, excuse me, I do not have anything up. But I think,
I would object to departing from the agenda. I don't mind if we come back to this after we deal with the other amendments that we have on the agenda, but we've already spent substantial time on this. We had a discussion, we took a vote, it was defeated. And given that this is our last meeting, I think that it should be done after we deal with the other amendments, not before.
well, I guess the only thing I'd say, Al, is I don't think I'm departing from the agenda. I think that I might be re-upping a motion to be reevaluated again, but I don't think it's parting from the agenda.
Well,
we weren't
the agenda
discussing
says
a lot of things.
we're supposed to commit our time, first of all, to amendments that were postponed from the earlier meeting, and that is not one of them. Then we're supposed to consider the new amendments, and it's not one of those. So it seems to me it does not correspond to the agenda.
Caroline,
With due respect to the point of order, I think that Doug Boucher is making, I would add the following, and that is that item, that is the threshold sort of centerpiece amendment that at least half of this working group is putting forward. And the vote that was taken, I believe precipitously in the last meeting, was based upon misunderstandings is the best word I'm going to use. The misunderstanding about what the process entailed in terms of time and who was looking at what point and what public hearings. And we now have clarification by virtue of information sent to the working group as to what the conditional use process is. And two, a misunderstanding in the context of other jurisdictions in the state and what they require with regard to conditional use or reasonable facsimiles thereof. So we had understandings that were either incomplete or incorrect before we took that vote. So whether it's right now or whether it's further in the process, I think what Randy's trying to say, I think he said it well, is that this is a threshold issue for at least half of this working group. And it is one that is mired in the law and the framework of how our zoning is undertaken in the county. So I would humbly suggest that it does require another look-see. I hope that some members of this group do see that would be important to do so.
Yeah, I'm fine with having more discussion of it, but we have an agenda. We have other amendments that we have not discussed at all that are on the agenda. We have amendments that we postponed from last time. And you may think that we misunderstood and that's why we voted it down, but some of us respectfully disagree with you and we voted it down, for good reasons.
There was an assertion the last time that other jurisdictions don't require conditional use approval, and that wasn't correct. So you can say you have a different opinion, but an opinion isn't looking at full facts. And somebody has their hand up.
Al, would you save me?
So just a couple of things. One, saying that we actually don't understand conditional use. I think those of us who've been working with solar for a long time in this state understand conditional use very well, and it's where it is used, where it isn't used, how it's used. So I think just the black and white pieces of it are only part of the way conditional use affects conditional zoning affects project review and approval. So I think one of the things that maybe not everybody else understands is the fact that there's a multi-step process of public hearings and other things. And perhaps if we're going to discuss this again, both in the planning review process, but also in the solar project review process, there are many steps that allow for the kind of discussion of the conditions that we're trying to put into the ZTA anyway, that would have to be discussed and reviewed in that process. So I think we can have a discussion. I think it's actually going to turn out to be a long discussion. And I therefore kind of agree that this isn't the best way to get started on moving ahead, because we have had a long discussion. But I think many of us do, from operational experience, understand what conditional zoning is and what it implies in terms of added process.
Can I ask a question there? Do you have an example of another jurisdiction in the state of Maryland that has got a comprehensive plan similar to ours and uses a conditional use type mechanism?
Uses conditional use?
That has a comprehensive AR zone that's associated like that?
Well, no, there aren't any that I'm aware of, right?
Okay.
But there are places that have put in.
Could I ask the co-chairs, are we going to follow the agenda?
We seem to be going into this.
If we are, we should be
Hey,
starting.
Doug, on the agenda, there's a tabled motion. It says Al Bartlett's amendment. It was tabled last month. So I assume you're bringing that back up, Al?
No. Though I don't think that the only amendment I put forward was to add the Comarth 20.62 reference, which I think we did accept. And then
Passed that? Okay, so
those were actually passed. There was that one. There was a recommendation to ensure the PSC language is removed. There was the recommendation for language with a strong recommendation from the county to only allow for projects of 2 megawatt size, nothing larger. And the one requiring solar developers to report all the acres used, not just the acres under the panels. So those were passed, and I'm not proposing anything new myself.
okay.
The
What's
two
the next?
the two
Al,
that-
Doug, what's the next? What's your next motion?
The two that were postponed were the Savino amendment, requiring use and not just suitability, and the 900 acre phasing amendment that was proposed by Leslie.
Okay.
So I
Are you
believe the
up this-
Savino amendment would come first.
Say that again.
I believe the Savino amendment would come first.
Okay, bring it up.
Okay, I think this is a relatively simple amendment that hopefully will have a great deal of support. Just to make it clear, it does not change anything about the requirements for pollinator-friendly management. What it does require is that under agrivoltaics or under solar grazing, that the land has to be planted, managed, and maintained and used for those two uses respectfully. In other words, it can't simply be suitable, but it has to actually be in use. And I think that's, that's a straightforward understanding. It simply eliminates what was pointed out as a possible loophole where you could establish something as a grazing area, for example, under solar panels, but never actually put any animals there to graze, which I think we would all agree does not satisfy the meaning and the intent of the requirement. So
Yes.
that's the, I'd be glad to answer more questions. That was proposed by Dan Savino, who's a member of Poolsville Green, as am I, and I hope there'll be relatively quick consideration and passage of it.
Yes.
Thanks for that. I for one find it hard to vote for amending the ZTA as a limited use. So that amendment applies to whether this is a limited use category. And so I'm having trouble with that particular amendment. It just doesn't comport with how we move this forward. So I'm sorry, I don't, it's window dressing.
Are you saying that you're not going to support any amendments if this remains a limited use
I cannot.
ZTA?
I can't, what I don't want to do is cherry pick amendments on a use that should fall under a certain category. And I'm troubled by the fact that and I don't know how many, I sort of like a show of hands in this discussion as to who has actually read what the full process is for the conditional use approval in the county of Montgomery, not any other county, in our county. Because I've heard some statements that talk about multiple public hearings and process that are just not accurate. So I am troubled by trying to put forward Savino amendments or other amendments that are contrary to how we would legally move this forward.
And
Just a
guess I will
clarification,
also-
when I was talking about the multiple hearings and so on, I was talking about the process of developing a solar project, which already has hearings in the PSC process. It has hearings in the county process. It has hearings that the project developers voluntarily have with community members when they're proposing a project. And it's not just about hearings, it's about process. What I was referring to is at least a year-long, often longer process that it takes right now to have a project go through the steps that it would go through if the ZTA were passed as a limited use with the Office of Planning doing the site review as required, which lists the conditions that we want to put into that site review, which is what we've been working on. That's what I was referring to. I have looked at the conditional use, and I also have direct experience with conditional use.
There are multiple hearings, public hearings. There are not multiple public hearings. Under limited use, there is a public hearing at the Planning Commission. It is a public hearing before the Planning Commission, not a independent hearing examiner. If it is a conditional use, there is a public hearing. There is a public participation at the Board of Appeals. There is no public hearing at the Planning Commission. The planning director makes a report, which is given to the planning board in a public meeting.
I understand.
So I'm just saying, you make it sound as if we're adding additional layers. We're not. We're asking to be put through what is the appropriate classification of use for this type of facility. Whether you have pollinator plants or whether you grow some tomatoes, the use itself is a commercial utility use that should require the type of classification of conditional use. And that's what we're trying to say. We want to advance this legally. Randy has said this. Well, the agricultural community had been at full stop. No, this is a give to agriculture. This is an acknowledgement of to the industry. This is a give that acknowledges the importance of advancing solar under the appropriate context of a conditional use. No amount of Savino amendments or pollinator plants is going to change the legal framework that this should be advanced in. And I'm going to keep hammering that point home.
Well, it seems like then we're going back to Doug's point, which maybe we'll just adjourn, because if all amendments are going to be objected to, if they're not, if conditional zoning isn't agreed upon, then I think we voted, and I don't think our minds are likely to change. So maybe we just stop now.
So can I just ask if maybe we can, I'd like to hear a little from Leslie and Franny about this, because again, it's, we have laws in Montgomery County. We have a master plan that that requires anything that is not agricultural in the ag zone to be considered under this conditional use clause. And if we don't go that route, any project that Franny or Leslie promoted and got into the county, it could be legally challenged. And, it's from discussions, it sounds like it's a lot of investment to get a new project in. $2 million, $10 million to do a 2-megawatt project, get that started. Do you want to risk that and have that be challenged in court? And, that's not something that is allowed under our master plan unless it goes through the conditional use process. And this is why we've sort of been, we've been trying to get our heads around how can we make this legal in this part of the county? How can we make a process that gets a project there that you aren't going to have challenged somewhere down the road? And if you go through this process, you will not have, it can't be challenged because it's then considered legal in Montgomery County. So I mean, you guys represent the industry, you represent people who actually are going to have to put these projects in. If you're offered a pathway to do this, does that not make sense to you to go with that? It's sort of it's a big compromise for us. We're willing to see these projects come forward if they're done in a way that's legal in the county. And we are, Carroll County, has conditional use. I think Howard County does. I believe Baltimore, and they don't even have master plans, but we do. And for us to do anything different is going to be against the law. And you can pass a ZTA and say it's okay, but it can be challenged because of the way our master plan is written. So Leslie, Franny, any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to raise my hand. So the way I understand it, because I have read the documents, the Montgomery County Planning website is actually very good. It's very well organized and has a lot of information. And so, yes, I have read those documents related to the conditional use process. And the way I understand it is the difference is versus the limited use is that with the limited use, and because of the ZTA that governs the limited use, it lists all the conditions by which the projects have to be built, with regard to the fencing and the vegetation and, all of those things that are listed, plus the ones we're considering adding, that at least, okay, we have a set piece of legislation. We know what zoning is applicable. And as a developer, we can plan or which projects, for where we might look for sites that would be viable. With the conditional use process, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that first it's on a site-by-site basis that you would have to take that application in front to the submit the conditional use application. Then it goes to a hearing, and then the planning board decides if that site is viable for a project, or they would allow a project at that site.
No planning board.
Yes, the co-chairs, could we get a resolution of the question? Is the Savino amendment on the floor now? Because clearly people are not speaking to it.
We're trying to come to a solution here, Doug.
That for us?
We're trying to reach an agreement, and we need to have just an open discussion, I think.
We have an amendment on the floor, and we should have a discussion of that amendment. As I've said, if we want to have an open discussion at the end after we've been through the amendments, I'm glad to do that. But frankly, we're not following the agenda.
I would ask the
co-chairs to please give us, a judgment on this.
Doug, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Doug. Doug Lecklider, you're on mute.
Is there a second to Doug Boucher's amendment?
Well, if we need to have more discussion about it, I will also just say that I think Franny was getting there when she was interrupted, but an amendment like this, these are conditions. These are things that we would include, so that Franny, you would know, what you can and can't do when you apply for a project. And this amendment that we're calling the Savino amendment which is really just the little bit about the grazing that Dan Savino objected to. I think that would be an important aspect of what was part of the conditions of a solar project here. But it all, to me, should all come under that. Is it conditional use or not? And if it is, then you put all the things like that in. But this is a fundamental sort of decision before that. And
Thanks. I hope that the co-chairs will allow us to allow Franny to continue. So because there are some clarifications that I can offer as to the process that she's putting forward to try to offer some assurances to the industry here so that they don't feel like they're flying blind if they went through a conditional use process. But
I'm simply asking us to follow the agenda.
I'm finishing my sentence, and the sentence is we have a motion on the floor, so I guess we can finish this vote.
Is there a second to the motion?
It was seconded last week, sir.
Is there a second to the motion? Then I suppose the motion dies for lack of second. What is the next tabled amendment?
It's the phasing amendment that Leslie put forward.
I think if I can just say that I think it's important that we finish out this conversation if it's at all possible.
Franny?
So I think what I was saying, as I understand the process, is that with the conditional use process, we don't have that level of certainty. It's where I'm saying is like we have to be able to plan for projects, for how we're going to plan our pipeline of projects, and how are we going to invest in the county as we do business. And the conditional use process is more kind of stop and start, versus with the limited use and knowing the conditions that govern the limited use, we know right up front what is required, and we can plan our projects to that from day one. And then everything else is governed by the site plan process, which also includes a public hearing as well as a community meeting. So you first start with a community meeting, and then you go through the site plan process, then you have a public hearing. And it's just, if you look at because I did go back and look at the application fees. I mean, just the application fees, again, I guess there would have to be one established specifically for solar, but they are huge.
Well, it's 20 some odd thousand.
Yes.
But just to be clear, Franny, they don't make something a conditional use without a clear set of conditions that mirror what we've been discussing under a limited use. So you're not flying blind. You are quite correct that under the jurisdiction or watchful eye or whatever you want to call it of the hearing examiner, there are site-specific conditions that are taken into account, whether, for example, you're next to a highly treasured historic resource or whatever, that aren't necessarily looked at with the limited use. But most importantly of all, this is the framework within which the county has dealt with these types of uses that are neither agricultural as a primary use or accessory to agriculture. That is the most important thing to tell you. Be clear that our intent is not to make this more difficult for the siting of renewable energy. It is to have it comport with the framework that has been in place, remains in place for these types of uses, whether they're radio broadcasting towers or utilities or pipelines or what have you. That is how we've dealt with it. I think if our communications continue, we can make sure that there is a clear roadmap or recipe, or however you want to call it, for how solar, what the conditions are, so that the industry is clearly armed with what they need to know to move forward under conditional use. And to your point about public hearings and a get together with the community, Lordy, I've been through that and I know how it goes, but it is not the same process from the public being involved at the conditional use, where they can articulate the specific conditions of their community. And as to cost, I spoke with some, because I was concerned about that. I spoke to some staff members at planning, area 3, which is where the reserve is. And I asked them, is it significantly more expensive to go through a conditional use process versus the full-blown process site plan at the planning? And they said it probably is somewhat of a toss-up given the number of hours that are required to work directly with staff to prepare for the public hearing and to sit through the public hearings, which are hours long there at the planning commission. So that cost of doing business at the conditional use level and the process versus the process at planning are really not all that different, at least according to the staff there. But I was acutely, interested in knowing how that was, because I didn't want the industry to feel that they were having to bear that cost disproportionately.
If I could add one thing here too, and Franny, one of the things you said is I think you said something along the line of a roadmap forward and knowing what can happen. It's very frustrating for me as a person that makes his living in agriculture, that agriculture sometimes does not get the credit of industry designation once in a while. And in this case, there's great discount in the fact that there's been 40 or 50 years worth of planning in this zone to ensure agriculture's future. And with the way this is going and whatnot, agriculture will no longer be number one. I'm sorry, but I struggle, and I think it's going to be number 2. It's a camel's nose under the tent. We can't compete. And the county's already made an investment towards this zone in their comprehensive plan to the AR zone and everything else. And so that does mirror and go forward with some of your thoughts there. And as far as the conditional use goes, it is the mechanism for us to go forward hand in hand. Is it going to cost something? Hell yeah. I just bought a combine today. $700,000.
Oh, wow.
It's going to cost something to go forward with solar in this zone. I don't think any of us are saying it's not. But it is the tool, the mechanism, the legal mechanism to go forward of the past 40 or 50 years.
Maybe the solar people should keep talking for a little bit. I have a couple of comments, but I don't know, Leslie, do you want to weigh in with a perspective on this?
I mean, I don't know that I have any additional perspective from what Franny has to say. I appreciate what Lauren says. However, I do not promote or develop specific projects. So I just represent a wide swath of developers. So I don't have any additional information than what Franny can provide.
So perhaps I have just a couple of comments. And, Randy, I appreciate your love of agriculture and you obviously are seriously engaged. Buy a $700,000 combine is pretty impressive. And, they don't even go that fast. But just a couple of things. Okay, just in the documentation that we have, because this issue of lawsuits is coming up, on page 11 of the staff memo, it says master plans are guides for action while zoning is law. So actually the master plan cannot be the basis for a lawsuit because it is not law. But more importantly, the things we put into the ZTA will become law. Those conditions that we're writing in actually will become law to which the projects will have to adhere. And the planning board, on behalf of the county, is responsible for making sure that it meets those conditions. That staff memo goes on to say that the council relies on the planning board to make findings of master plan confirmation. And on page 12 to 13 of the planning board memo, which is also in the documents that we have, it says, and I read this into the notes last time, but I'm not sure it made it. Staff believes that the limited area recommended for inclusion for potential development of solar collection systems in the agricultural reserve zone represents a small enough area of the AR to not significantly compromise the master plan for preservation of agriculture and rural open space designation of planting land as the primary, as farmland and agriculture is the preferred land use in the agriculture reserve. So the planning board, and we discussed this last time, did not find that this was in opposition to the master plan. So those are the documents we have to work with. And I just, a couple of additional comments and then I'll stop. But in terms of what the conditional zoning represents, and I imagine that you all perhaps know this. There are a number of circumstances in places in Maryland where conditional zoning has been weaponized effectively, where because despite what Caroline said, any squeaky wheel neighbor can come in and contest the hearing examiner's ruling, and then that ruling might ultimately stand, but it goes into an appeals process, which has taken up to 6 months to go through. If you do enough of these things, throw these objections in, throw basically sand in the gears, you basically can stop a project. And this has become the way that conditional zoning has been used in some places. And that is extremely unfortunate. It's a subterfuge, it's sort of guerrilla warfare, but it does cause significant problems and has driven some solar developers out of this state. The second thing, in terms of Randy, just to reassure you, and I because this came up last week, I did once again speak with Steve Darcy, who is the head of the Solar Preservation District in Prince George's County. He had, as he had said he would, consulted with his counterparts in other counties, Howard, Baltimore, Frederick, and found that there has been no impact on the rental cost of farmland from the limited amount of solar that's being built under the Community Solar Pilot Program, all of which in our zone is being built in Prince George's. And so that is not a real concern. It has not materialized in any places, and that's consistent with the documented experience in other states. So we just are, those just a couple of notes on some of the key points here, but I don't find substance enough in the argument that I'd ever change my vote on conditional zoning from the experience that we actually have.
So Doug, Lecklider, whoever's chairing, could I say something? So there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing that you stated was that master plans carry no weight of law. That
I was quoting Caroline from the legislative notes.
And I'm hoping to clarify that under the 2009 Smart and Sustainable Growth Act, which followed the very important Terrapin Run case, in fact, under state law, master plans must guide by force of law that any land use action, zoning text amendments, for example, must be in substantial conformance with standing master plans. That's the Smart and Sustainable Growth Act of 2009. That's
what the planning board found, that it was in conformance.
The planning board erred in finding that this use substantially conformed to the Agricultural Reserve Master Plan. They erred because it is not agricultural in nature or accessory, nor does it substantially conform to the primary use. And I will finish what I'm saying. And that would be, while one cannot decide what a court would decide, it is certainly, and we've conferred with our attorneys, and certainly Royce Hansen has written a paper on this and has spoken to it, There is a substantial body of thought that if the ZTA went forward as a limited use, not as a conditional use, that it would be subject to potential challenge. Now, I was not going to bring this up tonight, except that it's being asserted that this is actually a legal action that is being contemplated. And we are saying that it is indeed not. And that there is a legal pathway forward, we're repeating again. And there have been other assertions that you've made, Al, that there have been attempts to weaponize or guerrilla weaponize conditional use. That has not been the successful case here in Montgomery County, because there also has been case law that determines what is an inherent and what is a non-inherent component of a conditional use once it's approved. The public cannot come in waving their arms because they don't like a use. There has to be a specific grounds for a challenge to a conditional use. That it takes 4 to 6 months is just part of the process. The planning director makes a recommendation, and within 10 days of the conditional use approval hearing, that report makes its way to the planning director. There is also, by the way, as part of the conditional use process or the approval, there is an enforcement mechanism that is in place, which is, I would think, appropriate for everyone concerned here, that we have a very clear pathway in terms of enforcement on this. Not that there will be much enforcement for a static use like a solar field, but there it is. This is a very mature process in the county. It has not been subjected to community, advantage taking, and it is indeed the mechanism for these types of uses. I keep repeating that. So the notion that the zoning text amendment somehow would enforce of law trump the master plan is just inaccurate. It's just inaccurate. And I can share, if I haven't already, I thought that the Google Drive has the Smart and Sustainable Growth Act, but it carries the force of law.
Doug, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'll make this brief. I think Al stated quite well the reasons why this attempt to change limited use to conditional use is unwise, and certainly will delay the development of renewable energy in the county and make it harder for us to meet the goals of reducing our emissions as the county has adopted. Frankly, I've been hearing the same arguments we heard last week. They haven't been different, and they haven't been more convincing. So for my feeling, I think we should move forward with something else.
Leslie?
May I offer maybe an in between? So I'm hearing absolutely loud and clear, and I want to make sure that the master plan, and specifically to what Randy had said earlier, that agriculture needs to remain number one in the ag reserve, which I think that at least, Franny, you can kick me, but I think from the industry perspective, that is definitely the intent that we're going in with. So if since there seems to be a deadlock here, is there a way that we can ensure that the master plan is still part of the planning process? And is there a way to marriage maybe the Office of Agriculture into the planning process through through limited use as part of the recommendation? And would that weave the needle in an appropriate way?
For me, Leslie, I think everything you said is very appropriate there. I think the expert entity there to address whether this is all cohesive moving forward with agriculture, and where agriculture remaining number one, needs to be the Office of Agriculture. I think that in itself lends to some different discussions as we go forward. I mean, I hate to even bring this up, but as we talk about budgetary things and whatnot, We want to make sure that the Office of Agriculture has what it needs to move forward
Yep.
to help with this process. And I think, Doug Boucher, bear with me a second, because I think it could be the mechanism forward in helping to ensure that some of this can happen in the AR zone. And to Al and Doug's points, it might alleviate some of the fears. And now I'm going to use the word theatrics, because I didn't like there where you talk about I can't remember what you used there, but it was, people
Webinar.
sabotaging the process, and that was terrible,
But
because
Randy,
nobody's done that to solar.
I apologize,
So-
Randy. That's just the way it has been used by some folks in other
Well,
places that way.
In other places do not have what Montgomery County has. And I've been trying to dwell on that and move that point forward. I think Caroline's done a fabulous job on illustrating it. I think, when you spoke of Mr. Darcy in PG County, I don't know that they have the comprehensive plan that Montgomery County has for an AR zone. So it is different. All these other jurisdictions are different.
Understood.
And so I think, Leslie, I appreciate what you said there. And I think it warrants some more discussion.
And let me just say, I welcome that discussion too. I'll just say that my frustration comes from disappointment. I thought that at the end of last meeting, we were sort of on a track where we were actually looking at ways that agriculture and solar could blend harmoniously and meaningfully and even productively, and even grab that pioneering spirit that was talked about, that the farmers in the Ag Reserve have represented over the years, and actually do farming of land and farming of sunlight at the same time. That's the way some folks think about solar being mixed with agriculture, the folks that are kind of out on the leading edge. And we have a chance to do that. And I thought we were actually moving there last week, but now we've sort of gone backwards to this take it or leave it kind of conditional or nothing approach. And I am frustrated by that. And I apologize. I didn't really mean to insult anybody by that, but that has been the experience. And so anyway, I'll turn it back over to others. I apologize, but
We also feel, Al, that we're already doing some of that in the AR zone. And we're willing to do some more of it. And I think even welcoming solar, some more of it. But this is the mechanism it needs to be done in.
I thought that's what we were trying to do, and we were doing some of it last week, but we left.
Let's not forget that we've all agreed that moving from 120% generation on a farm to 200 is the right way to go. So if we're through this mechanism, we're already allowing farms to expand significantly what they produce in terms of renewable energy.
But okay,
Right.
we're on a tangent and I won't take much time on it, but how much real accessory solar is in the Ag Reserve? And I have a serious question to the farm leaders about why the REAP program, the USDA funded REAP program, which will provide 20% outright grant and up to 75% total project cost in loaning grants, plus technical assistance to any farmer or any farm-related business that applies. Why are people not snapping that up? Because you get the money back in about 7 years or sooner, and all the rest of your electricity for the rest of your life would be free.
Al, if you want to talk about subsidizing an industry, then subsidize agriculture, because
No.
if you want to do that, the best way to get solving greenhouse emissions, carbon issues, and global warming is through agriculture.
No, it's through agriculture plus solar. The solar replaces
Okay.
fossil fuels, and the agriculture does it. And I'm sorry, I didn't tell you if you don't know what the REAP project is, maybe that's part of the problem. The Rural Energy for America project is the USDA sponsored bill that provides funding and technical assistance to farmers to build accessory solar projects on their land or any rural business associated with farming on its business with up to 75% of the costs met by the program, funded not by the Department of Energy, but by the U.S. Department of Agriculture under the Farm Bill of 2018. And it's fully funded. That money is there for the taking.
Now, could you share that information? Because I'm not sure that one of the problems is I'm not sure that the agricultural community has had that information, and we'd be happy to get that out there.
That's what's crazy, because it should be coming through the farm bureaus, through the advisory board and everybody else. It is a national program. And I actually, the information is in the documents. In that document, I put together a document on the incentives for solar development, and it is number 2 after the investment tax credit. It is a major federal program.
Well,
Doug,
I got lost. I didn't see
It also might be the mechanism to help through conditional use to make this thing more palatable.
It would only apply to accessory. It would apply to the kind of things you all are talking about, which I totally favor. I wish every farmer in the ag reserve would take a serious look at this and consider building solar for their farm to get their electricity. That does not change the need for community solar to provide solar to people who can't have solar on their roofs.
Doug Boucher.
They're two different things.
Yeah,
But they both need to be developed.
thank you. I find it frustrating to raise my hand and wait to be called on when other people are just jumping in, but I think that is the process that we ought to be using. Raise our hands and ask the co-chairs to recognize us so that we could have a reasonable discussion. I think, a few minutes ago, we were at a point where we saw a possible way forward where Randy, said that, he felt that the involvement of the Office of Agriculture in this might be an acceptable way forward. And I'd like to hear more from Leslie as to what specifically she's proposing in terms of how the Office of Agriculture could be involved under the current definition, which is the limited use definition. So, if Leslie is willing, I'd like to hear from that and consider that as a possible amendment.
Yeah, I think that the Office of Agriculture works hand in hand with the planning board, and then ensures that the master plan is part of this entire process. Other than that, I think that the meat on the bones, if we want to add more to that, probably should come from this group. I'm certainly not an expert on how the Office of Agriculture or the master plan needs to work. So I would like to the fine members of this committee to be able to put the meat on the bones of this, of what we would want to put into our report. But if people are amenable to that, I think maybe that's a good way to thread the needle in order to move this thing forward. I think, I'm hearing, at least from my perspective and my perspective alone, I'm hearing very loud and clear that this is something that is incredibly important, both to the members of this committee, but also the public. And so if this is a way that we can kind of ensure that we can move the needle on this, and then let's do it.
So I guess I'll make a comment there. I agree with that concept, and I think Al, a minute ago was saying we got lost from talking about the things that we should be talking about, but I do think that using, involving the Office of Agriculture, considering soil types, considering slopes, considering protection of forests and environmentally sensitive areas, those things would, under the rubric or the conditional use approval process, you can have all of those things as part of that, part of what your guidelines are for your projects. So definitely, I think there needs to be involvement of the Office of Agriculture here, but all of it stems from a process. Leslie, you said we have to include the master plan. Well, if we acknowledge that this is a master planned area that we're talking about, we're not talking about another part of Montgomery County. This area is an area zoned for agriculture. So we need an exception in order to put a solar project here, because that's a commercial industrial use. And whether it's community solar or anything else beyond the 200%, which I hope we also will pass for accessory use, the only way we can do it that fits with the current planning and legal framework of this part of the county is to do it under that conditional use. And then I would like to, those three types of usage is whether you do require crops or grazing or a pollinator habitat. I think you put that in there, that would be a requirement to coexist with your plan, and that would be probably under the oversight of the Office of Agriculture. People would submit a plan and show that we're really doing this, and then they'd be reviewed every year to make sure that it actually was what they said they were doing. That's where the Office of Agriculture would have some oversight over the project. But fundamentally, the only way that this can be legally implemented is through conditional use in our county, in the ag reserve. In another county, they may make a different decision, but not in our county. Caroline, sorry.
Hey, what if, because I'm hearing, I heard what Franny said, and I really took to heart the uncertainty that she felt was part of the conditional use process.
Right.
What if the Office of Agriculture is given the appropriate resources to help guide the industry through the conditional use process? In other words, they help with the project to make sure that it is properly brought forward through first the planning director, who simply checks the boxes and goes to the conditional use process, helping the rural community to understand it, so that the industry doesn't feel like they're flying into hostile territory, that they become the guide, if you will, in the process. Would that be helpful to the industry? Because the Office of Agriculture would have that sort of capability. You're on mute.
Yeah, I don't think that helps the uncertainty issue, and that really is the key here.
Well, I don't know how to address that other than to say that the conditions are very clear as part of a conditional use approval. And I wish I'd been able to do the homework to find out in the other jurisdictions in Maryland that require conditional use approval, facilities are being built, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm just confused as to how it's working elsewhere, and it's perceived that it won't work here.
But the limited use has those same conditions. I think that's what we've been working on in delineating as through this process, that adding those conditions to the ZTA as part of this process. So under the limited use. So I guess that's where why is that different?
Yeah, but because it's not how the zoning code, the legal basis for land use, has dealt with uses that are not farming or accessory to farming. And the list is long. Did you look at the list? I mean, even landscape contractors require a conditional use approval. Why on earth would they require it and not an energy generation facility? That doesn't make any sense.
Because I think there's a lot more, again, I don't need to get into a lot of details, but solar is just so much more passive. You don't have the traffic, you don't have the people going in and out. It's just so much more passive. It just sits there. So you're not really intensively using the parcel.
Well, I hear you, but and I'm a broken record on this, then why is a pipeline, a utility line, a broadcast tower, why are those conditional uses? There's not traffic associated with those. I mean, that's how the zoning code reads it, whether there's traffic or not traffic. If it's not farming or accessory to farming, different use, it's under a classification that is conditional use. Sorry, Al.
Randy, you had your hand up, and then Al, and then Doug, in that order. Okay, Al, you're next.
Randy, if you want. You good, Randy? Okay, for now. Yeah, I was just going to make a suggestion to move forward. I mean, I think that this suggestion for involvement in the review process, whatever it is, by the Office of Agriculture, has a lot of strength to it. I think that I think you all see them as understanding your needs and your situation, and I think Leslie proposed that they would, part of their job would be to bring the perspective of the master plan to that review. In terms of conditional versus limited, my sense is that we have different experiences of it, different perceptions of it. We probably will not end up agreeing. I do think, one of our jobs this call, if this is our last call, is to decide about how we're going to write all this up. And I think we should try to write up as many things as we agree upon as possible. And then it will ultimately, we're not writing law. I mean, the council is going to have to make the decision. The council's lawyers are going to have to make the decision about what is and isn't legal. The Office of Ag has a role in that. The Office of Planning has a role in that. So I'm just wondering if we can look at pieces that we think, as we have a few, might be worth recommending together to the council. And then in our separate papers, which I think we're also going to end up writing, we can put on our sides about why it should be conditional or why it should not be conditional, and maybe a few other things that we don't agree on. It seems to me that that's about the only way forward here. Otherwise, we're going to spend the whole 3 hours talking about this.
Doug, am I recognized now?
You're on mute, Doug.
Yes, Doug.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think Al said it well. But I did hear at least some support for the involvement of the Office of Agriculture in the process. And, if we can simply pass an amendment or recommendation that happened, I think that would be a positive thing to do. I'm willing to make it into a motion if that's necessary.
Randy?
Maybe you're going to entertain Doug's point there. I was going to offer up a motion, and my add up motion is going to be to have conditional use as the mechanism forward for solar in the AR zone with the Office of Agriculture. I don't know what the proper term you want to put on this motion. Office of Agriculture's involvement.
Well, that's not what I was suggesting, and I don't believe that's what the compromise that Leslie was proposing. So.
Well, I offered it up in the form of a motion. I think maybe, I don't know what Doug's going to do. Was yours a motion? What is your motion, Doug Boucher?
Mine is simply that we recommend that the Office of Agriculture be involved in reviewing and making recommendations on the approval of solar projects.
Okay, we find ourselves with two motions on the floor at the same time.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Is there a second to Doug Boucher's motion?
I'll second it.
I would like you to repeat that motion so that we're sure what we're voting on, please.
Yeah, we recommend to the council that the Office of Agriculture be involved in the process in reviewing and making recommendations on solar projects in the agricultural reserve.
Is there any further discussion to this motion?
My only discussion on this is this, and that is once again, we're ignoring the legalities, the legal context, the legal way forward of the comprehensive plan of this county and 50 years worth of planning to make solar happen in the AR zone.
Any further discussion?
May I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Since we're stuck on conditional use, is there, and to you, Randy, is there a way that we can make sure that we have the legal constructs under that same provision that we may not be able to solve today, but we could put into our recommendation for this group to review? But I think it definitely, the meat of it really needs to come from the master plan that could go back to the council. That would be helpful.
Specifically, are you speaking on what the role of the Office of Agriculture would be?
Yeah, or like what are the provisions that we want to make sure are in there from the master plan that could be really helpful? I think that what you're hearing, just to be as simple and plain, is I think changing the from limited use to conditional use. I don't know that we're going to get alignment on that, but is there another way that we can thread the needle to ensure that the Office of Agriculture and the master plan are a part of the planning process that will ensure that agriculture remains the number one thing in the ag reserve, that the protections are there, that this group feels comfortable with? I think that's my intent of putting this forward. And I'm not sure that we can figure this all out in this meeting, but we certainly can try to put that forward in the plan.
Caroline.
So Leslie, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I think my concern is what the legal construct would be to make that happen, and whether under what exists as a legal construct for that, which would be advisory only without much teeth from the Office of Agriculture. What we're trying to say is that the teeth we're looking for is really provided by the conditional use approval. And I think there's one thing I need to say that I may have said before, but it bears repeating. We're keenly aware that the Public Service Commission, by a legal decision that took place in Washington County, could approve facilities larger than 2 megawatts in the reserve. We're aware of that. We're also aware that the PSC has said in their process that they observe a local preservation plan, master plans, and the will of a local jurisdiction. Please understand that our concern, in part, is that putting this use forward as a limited use sends a message to the Public Service Commission that we are open for business for not only up to 2 megawatts, but potentially larger facilities in the reserve, and that we have taken away from the strength of our argument from an inviolate primary land use in our master plan. So I just want you to be aware of that. This is not saying that anyone that's on this in this work group intends for that to happen, but that is something that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I totally understand the concerns around the precedent setting associated with that. But I do also want to say that we've already passed not only the removal, but also making sure that we are putting strong language in there that Montgomery County is going to intervene in any PSC actions that would try to put any larger facilities in there. And so I think that I think that we should definitely ensure that goes in, right? Is there a way that the Office of Agriculture not only is working hand in hand with the planning board, but then also we make a recommendation that they have to get to the teeth, that there is actionable items that they can do for the enforcement of the planning board? Would that be something that would be helpful?
Hal, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and I just wanted to recall that we are making recommendations to council. We're not writing the law here. So I think that if we can capture these points about, hopefully the Office of Agriculture will be in the discussion with council if we get our input to the council as they've asked a week before the committee meeting, with our different arguments and with essentially trying to express the intent we have here from in the discussion of what Leslie has proposed and Doug has turned into a motion, is to have the Office of Agriculture be a meaningful participant in the review of projects and the conditions associated with project approval. And however that comes out, if you guys prevail in the argument about conditional, fine. If the lawyers say that that doesn't work best here, but we do have all these conditions put into the ZTA and we will enforce those. I still think it's incumbent on us to work on the content of the ZTA in case it is decided, as apparently it was when the ZTA was written, that zoning is the appropriate vehicle for this this action. So it does behoove us to try to come up with ways to make it what we think the best, strongest thing that we can do. And again, I know I'm not entitled to use the word pro-agriculture, but I am pro-agriculture. I'm not a farmer. But I thought we were working on, and I hope we will work on, finding ways to make this, recommendations to make it the best that it can be. It will then go back to others to do the sausage making, as they say. No.
Right. Right. Therein lies the problem. I think I so appreciate the intent that's being articulated here, and feel thank you, Al, for your pro-agriculture stance. I think where I'm coming from is what is in place and what would be in our current construct, and what would be workable, what would be a process that would actually have the force of I don't know what I want to say, law here. So in other words, we can say, gosh, we wish, or, it would be great if agriculture would have a part of this, but that's not the current process. That would require some other actions in addition to what we're doing here. And I have real trepidation on saying that somehow is going to resolve the threshold issue as to whether this use is legal as a limited use. So I know I keep coming back to that. But I do appreciate what you're trying to do. And I still hope that whatever two reports and then the single shared reports that we do include the Office of Agriculture in this process, whether by limited use or whether by conditional use, whichever prevails at the council level.
Yeah. Well,
so what?
Just to say, I thank you, Carolyn. That was helpful. And I think that if we could do something like Doug's motion and agree upon it, that it is a statement of principle. And when we write our documents, we can, again, the arguments about conditional versus limited will be in there. But in any case, if we can go forward as having shown that we agree on an active and significant role for the Office of Agriculture in the review process, that would be a constructive thing to come forward and would have, I think, would carry some weight no matter which way the council goes on any of the other issues we're talking about.
Right, perhaps maybe Doug is going to amend his motion to capture what we've been saying.
Leslie and then Doug.
And I also just want to say that we probably need to talk to the Office of Agriculture, definitely, on like what this would actually look like. But that's maybe just me.
Doug.
Point.
Doug Boucher.
I just want to clarify that my motion is that the involvement of the Office of Agriculture in reviewing and making recommendations would be something that holds whether the council decides to use the conditional use or the limited use definition. It would be agnostic with respect to that decision. It would be something that ought to be implemented irrespective of which of those two options that they take. And it is, I think, you know, it sounds like there's a fair amount of agreement on it.
Right. If it's worded that way, that whichever pathway forward the council decides on, that the Office of Agriculture should have a part of the process, I think that I mean, I don't have any opposition to that. It acknowledges that there is a difference of opinion on the pathway forward, but that we all agree that the Office of Agriculture should have a part.
Good.
Any
I'm
further
very glad to
discussion?
hear that.
Any further discussion on this motion? If not, the chair will call for a vote. Do we need to repeat, or is everybody familiar with what you're voting on? Are we comfortable?
I would ask that you repeat it, or somebody repeat it.
I'm glad to do that.
Please do, Doug, and we'll expect it in writing too.
Okay. That
I can provide that.
the work group recommends that the Office of Agriculture be involved in reviewing and making recommendations on solar projects in the agricultural reserve. And I would add that this should apply irrespective of whether the defining conditions are conditional use or limited use.
All right, the motion's been restated very clearly. I would ask that all those in favor, please raise your hand. I think I would call that a unanimous vote for the motion. Thank you. Next item. That's a tough one. Yes, Doug.
I have another amendment that I circulated earlier, but you know, it's not one of the ones that was postponed from last meeting. So if we're willing to take up the phasing amendment that Leslie proposed, I would ask that we do it now. If not, I'll suggest that one of my amendments, the one on racial equity, be the next one on the floor.
Leslie, would you like to speak to that, please?
I mean, if we want to stay on the postponed amendments, I'm happy to put the 900 amendment back on the floor.
I think that's where we are.
So the 900 amendment essentially would have 900 acres would be for community solar and agnim projects that would be phased in over time. And then 900 would be for a pilot program for agrivoltaics with very specific programmatic requirements, and then also incentives that would also require working specifically with Montgomery County farmers. And the Office of Agriculture is also involved in that.
Is there any discussion? I guess I should be consistent and ask for a second to this amendment. And Al, Doug, I may be incorrect in asking for that, but I got to be consistent, my friend. Doug?
I'm willing to second.
Very good. We have a motion and second. Discussion. Very quiet here.
Yeah, I'll speak if no one else will. I usually find myself waiting because lots of other people are speaking. So I guess if we have some dead air, I might as well try to fill it. What Leslie has proposed is a way forward that allows us to begin the development of solar in the county immediately, which is what the climate crisis requires, but at the same time to move forward with the development of agrivoltaics in the county in such a way that they can become an important component of of community solar and aggregate net metering solar in future years. I think it's written in such a way that it limits the amount that can be done in any given year. It gives us the time to do the research, to do the pilot work, testing out agrivoltaics within the Montgomery County context, and yet doesn't wait until that research has been done before we move forward with other projects using the pollinator friendly definition, which is of course well established in the scientific literature as being beneficial to agriculture in several different ways. So I think it's been presented, it's been read by, I believe, all of us, and I think it's a good way to move forward.
Yes, Al.
Yeah, I'll speak. I'd really love to hear from the farm folks on this. But Doug Lechlader, I was impressed last time near our closing, you talked about how agriculture in the Ag Reserve had been really leaders in developing some new approaches and so on. And, you know, we've said from the beginning that our intention was to try to find a way to balance and even combine the interests of the primary use, the agricultural use of the Ag Reserve, and solar. And the science actually is very much in support of that. In fact, there are some charts in the documents file that others put there, I didn't, that show that if you combine solar with agriculture effectively, the solar has an incredible effect on reducing greenhouse gases, which is what the whole context for this discussion we're having, because it basically moves us off fossil fuels. And it also reduces, since we still have in Maryland a lot of coal-fired power plants, it reduces other pollutants as well that come out of those coal-fired power plants that are bad for our kids' health. I mean, I'm a pediatrician, and one of the major causes of asthma in Maryland has been the air pollution, a big chunk of which is attributable to coal-fired power plants. And so the solar does that part, and the soil sequesters the carbon if it's done appropriately. Not all farming actually sequesters carbon. Some is net carbon positive, some is net carbon negative. And I know that in the Ag Reserve, folks have begun to really work hard at some of the techniques for sustainable agriculture. So this possibility of putting them together and doing it in a way that the rest of the state hasn't done. I think Randy's right. You know, we have a unique entity here and we have a unique opportunity to be leaders and find the way to do this right. And to actually make that marriage that actually is potentially the most positive tool. Those two things together give us an incredibly powerful tool to address climate change, which has already affected the growing season in Maryland, and we know that. So it seems to me it's worth a try. And the possibility of having a portion of this be really a not just a learning exercise, but a developmental exercise, a pioneering exercise to actually help us try to make this work seems to me worthwhile.
Caroline.
So no question that learning more about how agrivoltaics can occur in our growing circumstances, that information is going to be very helpful. Clearly, there's a lot more questions now than there are answers in that regard, and a number of the pieces of material that I've read on agrivoltaics have emerged from out west, for example, in arid or desert climes that absolutely benefit from agrivoltaics. And so there's a lot of questions there. Be clear that a number of us have asked the county to advance pilot projects to learn more about this, and even on county land, like the Revenue Authority property in the reserve, for example. So we do want answers to those questions. I'm not sure I agree with the 900 formula that's been put forward, and therefore I'm not comfortable in advancing that at this time. But I do want us to seek out those answers before carving off a land and finding out that perhaps we're being more optimistic about what we can achieve in our growing circumstances here and the type of farming we do here. I know there's been a lot of conversation both amongst the group and certainly in the chat about what people perceive can happen here in combining the two, the industry of energy generation and farming. But I think there's a lot of questions that remain, and look forward to our being able to ferret those out through meaningful pilot projects.
How to answer, to just make a very short comment. This proposal here, I'm an eternal optimist, but I believe that in Maryland, you're going to be very hard pressed to grow. You know, when I look at this, it says the system will not interfere with the continued use of the land beneath the canopy for agricultural purposes. And I just, I can't picture that. The type of solar that's been proposed here, in fact, I tried to get at that at one of the early meetings, but Jeffrey Zients told me that there's no cement involved. I can't picture these things being high enough for harvesting and grazing and cultivating underneath of them without them being in quite a raised position. I know that there's some work like that in Arizona where they're in a desert. They probably welcome, the plants probably welcome the shade. But that's one of my thoughts. My second thought is, if this 900 acres of agrovoltaics does not work, what happens with that 900 acres? That was the test plot that did not work. That's my question. If someone could answer that.
Meaning to the facility itself or to the program overall?
If we've got 900 acres of agrovoltaics out there, and after 5 years and we evaluated and there was no significant crops, or the crops wouldn't grow underneath of it, we've learned something. But what happens to that 900 acres?
Yeah, so the way that it's currently written is that there would be a study that was done by the county itself that with the Office of Agriculture and the City Council, you guys would evaluate the program, submit it to the PSC in order to inform the community solar pilot program at the state level. And then you would either keep the agrivoltaic pilot program, or that program would cease. And then the remaining of the acres would go into the original program.
Okay, that's the answer to my question. Doug Boucher, you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually, I was going to speak to a different question. There's a lot of experience with agrivoltaics in the Midwest, and I put some of that into the documents on the Google Drive. The Department of Energy's Inspire program, for example, looked at 30 different sites in the Midwest. So, you know, there are certainly benefits in arid climates, but there are also considerable benefits in climates that are more similar to our climate here. The only way to find out if it works, and when I say that it works, is not only does it produce crops, but does it produce a sufficient income for the people who are doing the farming is to try it out here. So I don't think we can say either yes or no that it is definitely going to work or it's definitely not going to work. That's the whole idea of doing a pilot program, is to find the answer to that question.
Right. So I also like the idea of testing this out and seeing if it can work. And I think you're not going to want to hear this term again, but I think if you present a project under the conditional use approval process, then you're going to look carefully at what's being proposed, and if someone can come forward with a really good agrivoltaic project that looks like it can be successful and they're willing to try it on their land and do it, I'm all for trying it. I really am. And I think it's a great idea. I like if it could work, you just don't want to. My worry is that if you're going to put in a project that costs you $5 million to start, and you put in tomatoes or kale or whatever it is you're trying to grow, and it doesn't work, do we take those $5 million worth of solar panels? And I guess you'd write in that those have to then be removed because that project can't be done. It didn't work. So that's a big risk for the industry too, to have a project that says it has to have agrivoltaics, because if it does, then it does. It has to. You have to have teeth to whatever we say. And I think we need to recognize that you're telling us that we can grow crops and we can also have solar panels on top. So if it doesn't work, and we've all agreed that the Office of Agriculture should be monitoring this, and if they see it doesn't work, then we pull everything out and we go back to straight agriculture. I think, I guess that my worry about this proposal is that, it just says 800 acres of not agriculture, no agriculture in there, and then 800 acres of agricultural projects. It's not a whole lot different from what's there already. I mean, what's in the ZTA already. And unless each of those projects is carefully examined through that conditional use review process, I think then let's try them. I mean, Leslie mentioned to me the other day a company that she's really keen on. What's it called? Blue Wave, that does very, very, she's seen successful agrivoltaic projects. They work hand in hand with the farmer. Well, let's bring one of those projects forward and propose it and see how it works here. It'd be exciting to see.
I think Doug is next with his hand up.
Yeah, I believe that the way the amendment is written, and also the way Leslie just explained it, is that at the end of the trial period, 5 years, the project's evaluated, and if the agrivoltaics use is a failure, then it reverts to the other two possible kinds of vegetation under a solar project. I don't believe it requires that the solar panels be taken out, and I don't think that would be a good idea.
Well, then you're just putting industry out here, and you're saying you're going to try something, and that this. Al, you was saying before that it's solar is really important, and getting greenhouse gases down is really important. And I totally agree with you. We need to do it. We need to do it across the country. We need to do wind, and we need to do solar, and we need to do it in the right places. But we don't want to sacrifice our farmland, and we can't compare farming, how much carbon gets sequestered in farming and how much doesn't, to producing electrification in the country. Those are two different processes, and it's not fair to say one does it better than the other, so we should do all solar here. This is a farmland.
I know, I'm not,
and
yeah. I wasn't saying one does it better than the other. I said together they do it very, very well.
If they do it well,
we
that's
can-
great. And let's, then let's make it so. And if they can't do it well, then we don't do it. So we take them out if it doesn't work.
Just, may I just, yeah, I mean, I think we're agreeing that the agrivoltaic part of it is really one that has more learning associated with it. I will just say that even in Maryland, pollinator friendly is the standard of practice. Again, in my conversation with Steve Darcy, but in experience from other places, and Franny and others can weigh in on this. In Maryland, the standard of practice now is to have projects be pollinator friendly. That's proven, it works. We know how it works over time. It has been in place.
Not working in Poolsville, but I guess work
I'm sorry?
somewhere else. Not working in Poolsville, but maybe work somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know about the Poolsville plant, but certainly in Frederick, which was the project that actually the Secretary of Energy for the state, Ben Grumbles, attended the opening of a project that's pollinator friendly, which is now it has its own beekeeper and is producing honey. And was being called like, this is the win-win for Maryland. I think there are other options for what we can do that is agriculture beneficial. And so that's why having part of it be either or, the first chunk, whatever size that chunk is, be not a pilot, but rather let people build and use the agricultural practices that they believe they can make work. And we certainly know how to do pollinator friendly. And I know that you've said that and you acknowledge that, but it seems not to weigh as heavy, but it actually is a proven beneficial program. But that we know how to do. The other ones, we need to learn. It's been done successfully in other parts of the country, and we have a great extension and agricultural school in Maryland that we can draw upon.
Can I just add one caveat? I mean, it isn't written as a pilot in the amendment itself, but the community solar program in Maryland at the state level is a pilot program, and the way that the amendment is written, so it's two-phase, right? So the acreage phase program is written to study it from an economic standpoint and an impact standpoint, to then take what happens in Montgomery County to inform the statewide pilot program. So it can take what's going on in Montgomery County and have a more broad-based effect on what's happening on the state level, which I think is important because of the miraculous asset that you guys have in Montgomery County. And then to everybody's, for multiple reasons, agrivoltaics have not been widely used in Maryland as a whole, but also the solar market doesn't actually support this on the state level. So there's this unique opportunity in Montgomery County based off of the conversations that we've had to try to figure out ways to work collectively as an agricultural industry and a solar industry to see if we can utilize the willingness of the county plus these two industries to kind of figure out the mechanisms in order to make this work. But we don't all know if those things, all three of those things can come together in order to make that work, which is why it's a pilot program in addition to the community solar pilot program. So I think those two elements together can really inform a pretty cool program that will have bigger effects than just what's happening in Montgomery County, but also influence some of the state policies at the PSC level, and then also future legislation.
Okay, one comment, Al, I'd really like you to send me that address of that Frederick site. I would like to take a field trip and look at it. If you could send me sometime that address, I'd like to look at it.
Sure, it's the Baker Point project in, you could probably Google it, but I'll find the street address to tell you. It's the Baker Point project in Frederick.
Doug, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that what Leslie proposed is a compromise. It limits the acreage. It has limits on development for for several years. So it should be viewed as a compromise, and it's, it involves an agrivoltaic pilot project and the evaluation of that pilot project. But it is a way of trying to reach some consensus among members of this group.
Is there any further discussion? If there being no further discussion, we'll need to take this to a vote. All those in favor of this amendment as presented, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Can we do that vote again? Or Leslie, can you help me? I didn't see what was what. It looked
Sure,
like four.
Yeah. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed. Motion fails.
Okay, next, are there any other, going back to the agenda for Doug, is there any other tabled amendments from the previous meeting?
There are, so there's a couple that have to do with revenue. So, and I believe, Doug, some of yours come into this play as well.
Yeah.
So under the revenue piece, there was a proposal, and I'm sorry, I don't have it up in front of me, but essentially that says utilizing increased tax dollars that are going to come in from community solar facilities will be utilized for the Office of Agriculture to help facilitate the program. Other things that would be determined by the agricultural community, and then also the council in order to administer the program. And then I believe, Doug, you also had some things that you wanted to put onto the table for this as well. Is that correct? Or do you want to separate?
Yeah, that's correct. I wanted to put an amendment on the tax revenue to favor racial equity in the use of some of the money. And I should emphasize it's some of the money. It's not all the money.
So.
Yes, Al.
Yeah, just since Leslie didn't have the document up, the things that were in the list of amendments, if you remember, we put this together and it's in the document file somewhere, but all in one place. One was that tax resources from the acreage-based program, which now means whatever is actually approved, since we didn't just pass that last one. But anyway, the tax resources should be earmarked to support farming-related services, to include but not limited to rent relief, agricultural reserve funds, or other agriculture-related resources determined by the farming community and the Office of Agriculture. Another one was that preference will be given, I think this is Doug's, to Black and Hispanic farmers in distributing these resources. Another preference will be given to young farmers. Another preference will be given to table crops, and tax resources. A final one, the tax rate, and these again aren't mutually exclusive necessarily. Tax resources from the program should be earmarked for the Office of Agriculture, the County Farm Bureau, and/or other entities designated by the Montgomery County Council for program implementation. And then there's one that came from the Office of Agriculture that I think we may want to take first, because it doesn't necessarily affect the amount of revenue, although it might. But the Office of Ag proposed that we consider what Queen Anne's County has done, which is implementing something called a payment in lieu of taxes, which is an upfront payment that the solar project provides, and it is a fixed amount, and it can be directly administered to go to particular programs or services that are considered to be most relevant to the agricultural community. So instead of waiting for the revenue to come in year after year after year after year, there's an upfront payment or an annual payment, but it is directed rather than going into the general revenues. So this suggestion came from the Office of Ag. And I think it's being implemented in other places besides Queen Anne's. And I think some of I think Franny or others may have experience with it in other places.
Yeah, it works, to the county's benefit typically.
So anyway, that the whole set of subjects of there are a number of potential uses of revenues. We can discuss those, and then we can also discuss this mechanism, which is what the Office of Ag proposed, which is the fee in lieu or payment in lieu of taxes.
Doug Boucher.
Yeah, I think we have several possibilities here that we can discuss. And I suggest doing them one by one. Al suggested we discuss recommending the payments in lieu of taxes first, and I'd be glad to do that. The amendment I proposed on racial equity is I guess, has the status of an amendment to an amendment. So I believe, according to Robert's rules, you try to dispose of that one first, and then you consider the amendment as a whole. So either one of those ways is fine with me. I guess I'll let the co-chairs tell us what order we should do these in.
Oh, I have no preference, so just do them one at a time and get them out there so we can move on.
So can I just ask a question of sort of clarification about this group of amendments? Do we use of the funds that would come from any projects, is that something that will be designated in any legislation that comes forward? I think that these are tax issues, or
So that would be separate legislation. It would be separate legislation. And in fact, I think there's one council member that had something in mind along those regards, but certainly not as part of this ZTA. So the revenue stream is it, and certainly, recommendations from this group as to what they think might be nice for revenue stream is appropriate. However, I think we need to be aware that there's a lot of information that we don't have. What revenue are we talking about?
Right.
What is the county capable of letting go in terms, especially in these austere times, in terms of tax monies? So I think within the context of those unknowns and potential challenges, we have to understand that these are just recommendations. This is an industry that would need to pay their fair share in terms of taxes. And if some of that money could be put to some good programs, fine. But I'm a little uncomfortable with making a lot of firm expenditures of monies that we don't even know what they are yet.
so do we have some estimates, Franny and Leslie, again, of what sort of revenue is going to come in from a 2 megawatt facility generating solar project?
So obviously every project is different and every county is different, obviously, but
This is Montgomery County.
I'm sorry.
This is Montgomery County.
I understand that. So, I mean, I can give you a very broad estimate, but understand that it's very project specific and location specific, according to the municipality and the county. But it's probably in the $300,000 to $400,000 range over the life of the project in personal property taxes.
So you're saying that if you put in 2 megawatts of solar on someone's land, then over the life that you're talking 20 years?
25 years.
25 years. So that's annually, what'd you say? $300,000?
300 to 400.
Okay, so
Depending on the final acreage used.
Do
All the properties assessed.
14,000 a year,
how much?
14,000 a year.
14,000 a year.
We do have a financial analysis done by council staff
Yeah.
that was uploaded to the Google Drive.
Oh, I didn't see that. Sorry.
Yeah, Tommy Habor uploaded this to the Google Drive. It gives all the assumptions that
I
are
will
made.
find that and put that in the chat, folks. Hang on just a moment.
Yeah.
I did see it in there. It's in there.
Yeah, it estimates a 10-year cumulative impact of $3.5 million annually.
For
And-
how much? For 1,800 acres?
No, it's a 10-year cumulative impact, and the assumption is that 80 acres are completed annually. So over 10 years, that would be 800 acres. You can see all the details of it in the council staff's memo that gives the analysis.
I have put that in the chat, folks. If you'd like me to share my screen and pull that up, please let me know.
Randy, you had a question.
I mean, it's a frustrating comment. I got to tell you all, it's a frustrating comment. And here the industry is offering $350,000 up. And they're not even willing to spend whatever it is to go through conditional use and make solar positive and good and right in the AR zone. That's ridiculous.
Doug
Could I
Boucher.
clarify, this is not an offer from the solar industry. It is the property tax of Montgomery County. It's what you're required to pay. There's no offer involved in it. It's not playing
It's
your
willingness
taxes
to pay.
voluntary.
Yeah, and it might be, Doug, but I almost bet that if you were to write a contract doing this, it would be part of your contract. I got to tell you, sir, I doubt that you, with an ag assessment and your land where it is, you can afford to pay that kind of a tax thing without it being part of what you're doing.
And we're talking about how those tax revenues should be used. We're trying to get some of those tax revenues used for the benefit of agriculture, and particularly for Black and Hispanic farmers, for young farmers, for producers of table crops, et cetera.
It might be, but the proper way forward for all of that in agriculture is to do it cohesively and arm in arm going forward with agriculture. At this point in time, the way it's being done, it's jeopardizing agriculture.
Caroline.
So this is an important subject that I'm concerned that we are taking piecemeal here away from what should be a fuller, we talk about keeping the appropriate stakeholders in a discussion. The number crunchers at the county, the Office of Agriculture, the people that would be affected by this decision-making need to be part of this conversation. I would like to recommend, and I don't mean to step on, we can take these other amendments, but my recommendation as, not part of the ZTA, but a recommendation from this group is that we recommend that another group be formed to, very quickly to decide that with whatever passes in a zoning text amendment, how the revenue stream be handled appropriately to make sure that we are not having any unfunded mandates for people supporting this use, that we're making sure that we're not dinging the tax base that's needed for the general revenue to run the county, and that indeed we provide for uses such as ag preservation or whatever. But I'm afraid that if we just start picking off things in this group, that we're missing the larger context here. We can certainly recommend, as I said, that this is an important conversation that either we would like to be part of in a larger group, but that it needs to be given appropriate time and get full information on. So that would be my comfort level.
I think that kind of analysis should be done, and the appropriate body to do it is the county council in a separate piece of legislation that can go forward but we're at the end of our opportunity to recommend things to the county council. If we don't recommend that at least some of the tax revenues be used for the benefit of agriculture in the county, then it'll be up to them without any recommendation on our part.
No, I'm
And
not suggesting no
I guess-
recommendation.
I think-
I'm suggesting a recommendation that requires a fuller conversation and a more informed group of recommendations. That's what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying I don't believe we're informed enough to say that we should parcel off money to young farmers or parcel off money here. We don't even know if that money's there, Doug. I mean, right now, has anyone looked at the stream in this
We know
county?
some money is there. We know that this is going to raise more money in property taxes. I don't think any of us doubt that.
We also know that the county is in a world of hurt in terms of tax revenue. So I'm uncomfortable spending money that I don't know that is available. I'm just saying it's a bigger conversation. And I'd like to, I'll wait. If you want to go through each one of these ones, that's fine. But my motion is going to be that we recommend a group to hit this subject comprehensively and to make good, solid, informed recommendations for the revenue stream.
Well, okay, can we go through these one at a time then,
Just,
Co-Chair?
Al, you have your hand up.
well, I mean, I think we might, going to where Caroline's going, I think we probably will see potential advantages to many of these possible uses, whether it's young farmers or rent relief or promoting table crops or whatever. We might be able to put together a synthetic recommendation that, because this will have to be, we understand that, and I think actually from the council staff that were with us at the last meeting, they understood that we were talking about, I think we explicitly talked about this, putting together recommendations that would require additional legislation for aspects that couldn't be covered by zoning. And, Lauren's absolutely right. These things, the tax and revenue streams and so on cannot be managed under zoning legislation. They have to be under separate legislation. So we could make a recommendation that is sort of like the first one, which was general, but we can beef it up a little bit. It says tax resources from the program from solar development would be earmarked to support farming related services to include but not limited to, and the examples here were given rent relief, funds for the agricultural reserve, but we could also then add Black and Hispanic farmers, young farmers, table crops, or others, and recommend that a separate consultation process be held as the legislation is being developed to decide what those appropriate uses would be. But they should, I think we're expressing our intent that they should benefit agriculture and farmers.
Is there any further discussion?
So I'm
Yes,
sorry.
Doug.
Well, I would like to propose to amend the recommendation to simply add one sentence: preference will be given to Black and Hispanic farmers in distributing these tax resources. And if that's seconded, I'll explain why I think it's necessary.
What did you add that to, Doug?
It's to the sentence which I believe you read, which is tax resources from the community solar and ag-nam developments should be earmarked to support farming related services to include but not limited to rent relief, ag reserve funds, or any other agricultural related resource determined by the farming community in the Office of Agriculture. And I would add, my proposal is to add at the end of that, preference will be given to Black and Hispanic farmers in distributing these tax resources.
Caroline?
Very quickly, I just want to say, because I must, that this particular amendment as reworded hits me a funny way. We heard the last meeting from just one of our new farmers who happens to fall into the very group that Doug is saying that this will benefit, who have told us, who have asked to be heard, that the ZTA as a limited use and in a conflict with the zone presents a challenge to the very group of farmers that we're referring to now, our Black, Hispanic farmers are trying to get affordable acreage here, and this zoning text amendment, they have said, presents a challenge for them. So I find it, I don't know what word I want to use. I'm struck by the amendment. That's because part of what we do at MCA through our Land Link program is finding this affordable acreage for that very group of farmers. And it is a challenge already. And this zoning text amendment, as it is presented, will add to that challenge. So I'm just trying to express that I'm struck by the irony.
I also
Can
have,
I go ahead and explain the amendment and give the justification for it, Doug?
Just let Lauren go real quick, and then yes, you're next.
Okay.
so I like where Al is going, and I probably am going to need to hear it again because I think we need to recommend something general and broad, not because I also agree with Caroline's point that this is not something we can decide in the next half hour. You need to have other stakeholders here talking about this that aren't the people in this room. That's not, we're not the ones that matter so much. But I also think that I agree with what Caroline just said, but I also think to single out Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. What about people of other minorities? What about, young women, gay and, I don't know. That's a funny thing to say. I don't know. It's just maybe you say, you use a term about underrepresented. I don't know. But I also think that it's there is something that makes me squirm a little bit at the thought of taking away land that could be used by new farmers who are looking for reasonable land and taking it for someone who's going to pay $2,000 to $5,000 an acre for it. Those people are immediately excluded from having farming. So it's kind of like making a recommendation that we want to do good things for these people after we take away land from these people. It's just as, I don't know, I'm in trouble with it.
Okay, Doug.
Yeah. The basic justification for giving preference to Black and Hispanic farmers is that they're severely underrepresented in the agricultural community of the county. And let me present some data on that. This is from the Census Bureau's 2013 to 2018 ACS survey and the USDA Census of Agriculture 2017. And both of these documents were uploaded to the Google Drive, and they're also explained in the document in which I put forward the amendment. The reason for choosing these two groups is that they have been severely discriminated against and are severely underrepresented in agriculture, certainly in the United States as a whole, but particularly in Montgomery County. Black residents make up 18% of Montgomery County's population. However, they're only 12% of the population of the agricultural reserve. They're only 4% of the county's farmers, and they have only 1% of the farmland. The situation is comparable for Hispanic farmers. They make up 20% of the county's population. They're only 10% of the population of the agricultural reserve. They're only 5% of the county's farmers, and they have only 2% of the farmland. If you look at the acreage of farmers of different racial and ethnic groups in the county, white farmers in the county have farms that average 124 acres. Those owned by Latino farmers Hispanic farmers average only 42 acres. Those owned by Black farmers average only 18.5 acres. And I don't think it's necessary to go into the complete history of racism in the agricultural sector in the United States. Obviously, you know, the heritage of slavery, the heritage of Jim Crow, but also more recently, the discrimination of the USDA against Black farmers, which resulted in the largest ever civil rights lawsuit against the federal government. It was settled by the federal government, admitting many decades of discriminating against Black farmers. Also the history of immigration to the United States, particularly from Latin America, in which Hispanic farmers have been a major part and continue to be a major part of the labor force, including in Montgomery County in agricultural work. But as the numbers I just presented show, they are represented as laborers, but in very few cases as farmers. They own very little farmland. The reason for specifically mentioning Black and Hispanic farmers is that the data are clear from the census that they're severely underrepresented. One can make the case, but it is not as strong for Asian farmers. One can make the case, but it is not as strong for women farmers. So that's why I limited the amendment to the two groups for which we have abundant evidence of historic discrimination, and we have very strong evidence of their underrepresentation from the census. I won't go back to the repeated assertion that solar discriminates against farmers of any kind. I think we've made our positions on that clear, but it is, I think, important, and particularly this year in which America has had somewhat of an awakening of the importance of racial justice, the importance of taking action to deal with past discrimination, that we put that into the ZTA. I've already spoken earlier and I've written an article with Crystal Hansley about the climate justice aspects of community solar. That is with respect to the ability of poorer people in the county, of people who are renters, of people who have no ability to put solar on their rooftops, to nonetheless get the benefits of renewable energy and to get the lower prices for their electricity that community solar provides. That's looking at the consumer end of it. I think we should also be looking at this from the farmer side of it, and that's the reason for this. Finally, just want to make it clear, this is not all of the money. This is a preference. This is not an earmark, and it will have to be done in separate legislation, and this certainly can be discussed by the council. They can set up, if they want, another stakeholder group to examine the details of it before they pass that separate legislation. But I do think it's important for us to at least say that we think this is an important issue and it ought to be dealt with using some of the tax revenues from the ZTA.
Lauren, you had your hand.
Well, I guess I appreciate that. Thanks for that overview and historical lesson. And it brings, you really raised the important point of what we should be doing in our county, which is if we want to get more people into farming who have been denied that. I think this LandLink program that MCA is promoting is a wonderful thing. And I'd like to know from Caroline how many people you have looking for land right now who fall into that kind of category. And you probably don't have people, you know, we haven't asked them what color they are, but.
want to answer that question, and thank you for asking it. You're quite right. We do not ask our applicants about their race or creed or anything. We don't feel with some share with us. But I will tell you this: since the pandemic hit, we have had an incredible uptick in the following groups of farmers. That includes a Black, immigrant, veteran, and women farmers have joined our ranks. Currently, we have, I believe, Christina could clarify, I think we have 40 farmers searching for land in the reserve, and we only have, I believe, 15 current property owners who are offering up land. We have already heard from some of our land bank farmers and from other farmers that they have been told that the farms that they were considering looking at are actually considering instead to lease to solar. The farmers have told us that there is no way they can compete with the amount of money that solar is offering per acre, and they are deeply concerned. The record now holds recently, or when I say the record, the Google Drive holds a recent letter that was submitted, I believe just yesterday, from Mark Grossman, that indicated he is concerned if we're not very careful with how we put forward this ZTA, that his leased farm will be at risk as well. So I appreciate everything Doug said about those members of the farming community that have been underserved and have been discriminated against, and the need to press forward to do better. I believe having access to affordable farm acreage in the reserve is how we can do better, and providing the support services that I hope we will provide in the years ahead, like our pilot farmer program. But I remain concerned that we are window dressing a ZTA that, as currently configured, actually is doing more detriment to that very group of farmers than help.
I'd like to remind the group that it's now 8:44, and we will, I'm continuing to listen, but if we have an amendment that needs to be voted on, if there's, yes, Al.
Oh,
yes, Al.
Yeah, I was actually, Lauren had a comment, and then I actually was going to try to synthesize and propose an amendment that goes along what Caroline was talking about before and so on. So, but Lauren, go ahead, please.
Thanks. So I just also, I needed to, again, going forward, we haven't made much progress here, but if whether we end up with a conditional use or a different kind of approval process for this, there are all these components to that we at some point we want to agree on that are part of what a project would look like. And Doug, I like that you referred again to the importance of community solar, and we haven't talked about that at all tonight, but I think that's you again referenced the importance of getting community solar to subscribers in the county who are in multifamily housing and they can't put it on their own roofs. And I guess I just want to emphasize that again is something that would be of a value to us to serve those residents in our county who can't that projects, if this is approved and community solar projects are approved, which I am very much in favor of, that those residents in our county get served by that project. I believe there's about 200,000 residents that would be that fall into that category of being within both that could be served out of the ag reserve in Montgomery County.
Right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Al.
No, thanks, Lauren. No, and I've spent a lot of time on community solar, and I couldn't agree more. And there are, an estimated 3/4 of the population of Montgomery County can't have their own solar. So there's plenty of market and uptake for community solar, and there is a low income and low moderate income carve out as well. So yes, I think we can make this work. what I was going to propose was sort of a synthesis of the different points that we had, and I scribble this out based on what had already been written. I'll just read it and see what people think, and then we can modify it, whatever. So it'd be basically revenue from solar development, the agricultural reserve under the ZTA should be, it's used the word earmarked, but I think should be used to support farming related services. For example, rent relief, land preservation, young farmers, table crops, and et cetera, I guess, through a consultative process that includes the farming community and the Office of Agriculture. Part B, preference will be given or should be given to Black and Hispanic farmers in distributing these resources. And 3, tax resources from solar development should be earmarked for the Office of Agriculture, the County Farm Bureau, and other entities designated by the County Council for support of program implementation. So there are 3 different categories. There's a suggested use, but not an exhaustive list. There's a consultative process. There is the preference for minorities. And then there is the designation of some resources to support the oversight and management of the program. So that's all wrapped together in one package there. So feel free to weigh in on that.
Doug.
I would certainly support that. I would just say that if for some reason we reject that, I would like to have us revert to my amendment, which is simply the preference for Black and Hispanic farmers. So let's go forward with the discussion of Al's, and then if not, let's come back to the one I presented.
Okay, is there any further discussion? I would just like to say one thing that I keep hearing here that we really need to make clear to the people listening. We keep hearing this term community solar in for Montgomery County. And I think we've been pretty clear in earlier meetings that most of this solar will not go in Montgomery County. So I just mentioned that.
No, Doug,
where's it going to go?
There is plenty of uptake in Montgomery. We have discussed it, and I guess we just haven't come to agreement. But there is both PEPCO. About a quarter of the land we're potentially talking about is in the PEPCO region. There is plenty of uptake in Montgomery County in PEPCO. Some of us in Montgomery County, as I've said before, like myself, are receiving solar from Community Solar, but it's built in Prince George's because you can't build it in Montgomery County right now. But there's plenty of uptake, and in the Ag Reserve. There are, and we listed the cities, but includes like Damascus and Poolesville and other large cities out there that towns, good sized towns, but there's enough population to take up whatever is produced in the Ag Reserve and keep it within Montgomery County. It can potentially be bought by people in other counties because the law as it's written under the regulations say that the utilities are responsible for distributing the energy produced by a community solar project in their utility service area. And so you've got Potomac Edison, you've got PEPCO and a tiny bit of BGE, but I don't think anyone's going to build there in the agricultural reserve. But there's plenty of opportunity for uptake in Montgomery County. And that's not even getting into the discussion of the fact that whoever pays for the electrons gets credit for cleaning up the air. That's the way it works. If you buy fossil fuel, if you pay PEPCO right now, you're getting a mix of fossil fuels and nuclear. If you pay Community Solar, you're paying for solar. You get credit for that.
Very good. Credits is the most important part. Okay, is there any further discussion on this amendment? Is everybody clear with it? Doug?
Well, I guess I'd just like to say, I think the way Al put it forward as an amendment combines several things that we've decided were important to support agriculture, to support rent relief, agricultural preservation, but also young farmers, table crop production, and it includes the preference for Black and Hispanic farmers from my amendment. So I hope we'll support it.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Maybe, I mean, we say that with the caveat that these things should be, we don't presume to, I mean, this is a lot of, I don't know.
It's not an exhaustive list. It wasn't meant to be an exhaustive list.
It's not an exhaustive list. It's also not clear, you know, what would happen with any one of those categories and how that would, so I guess I'm just looking for a way to also say, these are suggestions that we would like to recommend that you know, another group of people who actually would be affected by this might take up, and I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's a lot for us to presume to.
No, it wasn't prescribing those, Lauren. It basically, it listed those things as, for example, and then it said through a consultative process that includes the farming community and the Office of Agriculture. So the process of determining, you know, the what and the how would be developed through that consultative
Yeah,
process.
I like that. Good. Thanks, Al.
Yeah.
I didn't quite hear all that language before.
Any further discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand.
Yeah.
Keep your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5-4, so that is the majority. The motion passes. Okay, next. Yes, sir, Al.
Yeah, could we, before we leave this area, can we take up that discussion about the fee in lieu of taxes versus tax revenue? It actually, again, it came from the Office of Agriculture, but it actually is potentially a plus in the sense that it gives the county certainty of the amount they're going to get, and it allows that to be directed to specific things that might come out of this consultative process. But it also lets the solar people coming in have know exactly what they're going to be held responsible for. So it has been proven useful in other places. And again, Franny, I think, can speak of that, but the Office of Ag was citing Queen Anne's County as the example of where this is being done. I mean, again, it would be a recommendation from us. The council doesn't have to take it, but if we believe that we can even just recommend that they consider it as an alternative to taxes.
Is there discussion on this item?
Is there a figure involved?
No, that would have to be determined. I mean, I think you'd want it to match the expected revenue. Franny, how does it work in other places?
So typically what happens is it's a known payment up front that the county then can count on and use more immediately to address near-term, typically infrastructure issues. But I know that we've discussed, you know, trying to, and I hate to use the word earmark because I know that's not necessarily a good term to use, but if you wanted it to go specifically to young farmers or minority farmers or the farming community in general, in order to support different activities within the farming community that need support. That would be up to the county to do and to dictate if in fact that were even, allowed. So I think that we had talked about that several weeks ago about, what actually the county is allowed to do with regard to earmarking or directing specific tax revenue to certain entities or just for specific projects. But the payment in lieu of taxes is it's just a different definition of the taxes so that they could potentially get it earlier and actually put it to use earlier.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was not staring at the screen, but I'll go with Caroline and then Doug, please.
I just want to say, notwithstanding this being put forward by the Office of Agriculture, I am currently uncomfortable with the notion of a fee in lieu. I don't know enough. I can't wrap myself around it. So I just wanted you to know I'm not comfortable with it.
Doug?
Yeah, 2 points about this. First of all, payment in lieu of taxes is fairly well established as a program at the federal level. And in fact, it's called PILT, stands for payment in lieu of taxes. It was adopted several decades ago, in particular to help counties in the Western United States that have a substantial portion of their land in federal holdings, in national forests or in Bureau of Land Management lands, or national parks of several different kinds. And it was adopted so that counties would not suffer because some of their land is put into federal preservation kinds of activities like national forests, national parks, et cetera. And many counties depend on the property taxes in order to fund their schools. That's a standard way that we fund schools in the United States. And so the payments to counties in lieu of taxes were a way of recognizing that on the one hand, the federal government is the top level of government in the United States. Counties are not allowed to tax the federal government or land that's held by the federal government. But on the other hand, that the federal government is causing a burden to counties when it takes their lands off of the tax rolls, and the payment in lieu of taxes is a way of making up for it. And it's generally calculated so that it would be equivalent to what the land would be paying in property taxes if it were in private hands rather than in government hands. Second point is that in a sense, this is a simplified way of doing what's going to happen anyhow. And that is that when solar projects are developed on landowners' land, it generates more income for them, therefore it increases the value of their land, and therefore it increases the assessed value of their land for taxation, and they owe more taxes. And because of that, a standard provision of solar developers' contracts with landowners is that the developer will pay any increase in taxes that are caused by the solar development. So basically the money goes from the developer to the landowner and then to the county in taxes. This is just basically a way of simplifying the process and having the same amount of money go directly from the developer to the county. It provides more certainty for the county. It doesn't change the amount. The amount is calculated to be equivalent to what would be paid in property taxes. But it does, it does make it a little bit easier in terms of, it reduces the transaction costs and it increases the certainty of how much money is going to be coming into the county. So for those two reasons, I realize it's not equivalent to the payment in lieu of taxes at the federal level, because the county can and does tax private landowners who have solar projects and are making more income because of that. But I think it's a well understood process, and is something to recommend to the county council. You know, they can look at how it's functioned in Queen Anne's County. They can talk to the Office of Agriculture who recommended it, and they can work out the details.
Caroline?
Well, not to belabor it, but I mean, it may be well used elsewhere. It is not, has not been oft used in Montgomery County. The most recent example that was controversial was the WMATA fee in lieu for developers developing near transit locations in the county. And that is, you know, that's an incentive for the developer there, but it is not, I don't, as I understand it, is not an equal revenue generator for the county. And we're suggesting that it be earmarked specifically for a set of uses, which would mean that it would not be revenue that might be necessary for the county. Look, nobody would say greater than I that I would love to see a lot of this revenue stream going to diverse farmers, to Office of Agriculture, to ag preservation, and to learning more and transitioning to greater regenerative practices. But you know, this is not our money to spend. We can make some, again, the recommendation for to look at this is appropriate, but I am still concerned that we are making recommendations out of school, and this fee in lieu is just not something that we have applied very often, if at all, in the county, except for the WMATA case.
Al?
Yeah, can I just I would move that our recommendation be that the county council consider the Office of Agriculture's suggestion that payment in lieu of taxes might be an appropriate mechanism, and that's all, that they consider it. And that would be a recommendation, that we're not saying they should do it.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Doug? Any further discussion on that motion? If not, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
I'm going to vote on that one.
We've got 4 votes for that, so that is a deadlock. Okay, it is now 9:05. What else do you have to come before us? Doug?
I think we should have at least some time in this meeting to discuss the process of preparing our report, and you know, basically 3 components of the report. Clearly, you know, there's the one component that is the list of the amendments that were adopted. I'm not sure exactly how many there are, but I think there's 10 or a dozen, and I'd suggest that whoever writes that up, the co-chairs should be responsible for editing it so it fairly represents both sides. And then I think we should allow each side, and I don't think we have to be naive about the fact that there have been 2 sides in most of our votes and in most of our discussions, and we should let each side write up their explanation of the things they proposed that were not adopted and why they think they should have been. So I would propose that we have basically a 3-part report, and we can, you know, decide who's going to actually do the drafting of the different parts. But as I mentioned, I think we should ask the co-chairs in particular to review the part that lists the amendments that we are recommending, to be sure that gives a balanced explanation of those amendments. For the other two components, I think, we can let each side write up their positions in their own words, and they don't have to be edited or approved by anybody else.
Doug, I think that's a fair plan. I'll have to, I don't know if we need to do it right now, but I'd certainly talk with Leslie about the most important thing is, yes, what was passed and agreed upon by the majority, it needs to be well represented. And I think it should be circulated back to this group before it is presented any further. As to who writes that, I don't have the answer for that. Leslie and I will talk about it. We've got a couple people in here that seem to be pretty good at writing this kind of stuff, so we'll discuss it and go from there. I'm open to discussion on this, but I think it's a fair proposal that each group will probably want to write their own. I wouldn't call it a minority since we seem to be split right there in the middle, but their own report, and go from there. I do believe that we indicated that we would take some questions, and if this group is up to it, there may be some pertinent questions that may give us some information onto this report we're going to write. Leslie?
May I just ask one point of clarification? So we passed a bunch of unanimous amendments, which I would like to congratulate this group on doing, because I think that's pretty great. And then we had one amendment that passed with just 5 votes. Do we want to include that in one report, because we only have that one to circulate, and then have our 2 separate reports that go in? Does that seem fair to folks? Okay, cool. That was my only follow-up question.
Thank you, Leslie. Just remember that, because I'll forget. Thank you. Al.
Yeah, could I just introduce the notion of deadlines? The council had indicated that to be useful to them, a report from us should reach them by a week before their meeting on the 14th. So that would make our deadline technically next Thursday, but certainly no later than next Friday. So we probably need to have drafts done no later than the beginning of the week, I guess, circulated, commented, and finalized so that they can go to council staff on perhaps this Thursday COB or something like that. That makes sense?
That shouldn't be hard. That shouldn't be hard to do, in so much as there's one part of this which is just very firm. We had votes and those were documented. And then there's the other 2 parts that each of the 2 what have emerged 2 groups will take on and circulate amongst themselves. So that doesn't require 8 people going over them. That just requires 2 groups of 4. Then the co-chairs can figure out how they want to bring that all together and what kind of formatting or whatever they want to bring it together. But that seems like a fair time frame now.
So for the drafts, is end of this week or better beginning Monday of next week a decent timeline for the consensus report? And then
I would suggest close of business Monday for the drafts so that we can get the final version and send it to the council staff. And specifically, this is going to Jeff Science, and he's got to incorporate it into his packet that he prepares for the committee meeting. And so I think we should have a goal of getting it to him by the close of business on next Thursday.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Christina, you've joined again. Oh, I'm sorry, Al.
No. we can do it now, or we can do it at the end. I just wanted to express my appreciation, but I'm sure others might as well. So if we can leave a little time at the end for that as we close out, that would be good. We're going into a new year, and this has been a challenging but constructive process, and I think we might want to talk about that a little bit, but I'm happy to wait.
Christina, I think that the group is ready. If you have some people, perhaps it's 9:12. I think we ought to be wrapped up here by 9:30. So I'd say maybe 8 to 10 minutes, depending on how many people you have that would like to talk.
I have no one so far. So if any attendees would like to speak, they can certainly raise their hand, and I have it pulled up here. And
I suspect we've probably driven them absolutely crazy. If I
Or
didn't
they
have
went
to be here, I'd leave.
or they went to sleep, one or the other.
Yeah.
Don't you know it?
I will just say that I did put the link, but I'll send it separately as well, to the USDA Rural Energy for America program into that chat. So that's there, but it's also in the document that's in the technical section, I believe, under incentives. There's a whole section of incentives.
Yeah, thank you, Al. And folks who are on this Zoom should know that Christina Bostic has enabled the ability to copy the chat. Also be able to get, so chat can be copied. It will also be forwarded, if I'm not mistaken, to those who've attended so that they can have.
So folks are asking in the chat right now. It is going to be saved. It is going to be circulated. It will live in the Google Drive. It will also be emailed to everyone. If you got an email from us about this meeting, then we have your email. We will be sending it to you. Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any questions, then Al, you had indicated you wanted to do something here at this moment.
I'd like to be on the list for that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for all of this has been a challenging process. I think we knew that when we took it on, but I've appreciated the fact that we've handled some difficult issues. We haven't always agreed, but I honestly believe in, if we all wrote down a list of the things almost started to do this. If we all wrote down lists of the things that we think are important to us in the world, I'll bet there's a lot of overlap in those lists. And I just want to express my appreciation and respect for everyone that's let themselves be part of this process and work together or not together, but civilly and responsibly. And, I think hopefully we all come out of this with respect for each other and appreciation for each other and recognition that, we're all trying to make the world as good a place as it can be. And that's all, I just appreciate that.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Doug?
Yeah, I'd like to add my voice to Al's and appreciation of the fact that although the process was difficult at times, we were able to get agreement on really a substantial number of recommendations to the county council. They're the elected people, not us, so they will decide whether they're going to take up our recommendations or ignore them. But I think the fact that it came from a group like ours representing stakeholders and represented in most cases a unanimous consensus will have some real influence with the council. I'd also like to mention that, to just add a little more specificity of the things we agree on, the things that we would like to move forward. There was considerable discussion, for example, both earlier in the year and in the first few meetings of this group about the need to promote the development of renewable energy in the county, including solar on part of the land of the Dickerson power plant. And I think that's something we can work on. That, of course, is not is not within the county's jurisdiction exclusively and is a complicated situation, but I think that's something that we have, you know, a good deal of agreement on, and the fact that we could come up with some compromises on this issue, I think is a hopeful sign that we could also agree on things like that. And then there are other issues that I think we are going to be facing over the next couple of years. One of them that Poolsville Green has already discussed, and I believe some of our members have reached out to Sugarloaf Citizens Association and to Montgomery Countryside Alliance, is the question of promoting composting on farms in the agricultural reserve. And I think that's something that we have sort of broad agreements and maybe disagreements on some of the details, but this process indicates that we may be able to work out a common position on that I think we'll have, again, you know, if we can speak with one voice to the county council, I think that'll have considerable influence. So just want to say thank you to all the members of the group, as well as to the council staff who helped us a great deal through it. Tommy Hayboy, in particular, Jeff Snyder, yeah, the three of them I think were very important, and I think we should express our appreciation to the council in some part of our report to the council for the work they did to help us.
Okay, Lauren?
Yeah, I'll just pipe in and also say this has been an enjoyable in some ways and hard in other ways process, but I appreciate everybody putting the time in that's here and being willing to do it, because this was we were given a pretty strict timeline in a period that other people have decided to go on vacation and said, you guys keep working. And we're all here, so that's impressive. A couple things for me though. By going through this process, this has really clarified for me what, you know, I might not have gotten to this without having to look at what everyone's proposed and think about the ag reserve and thinking about how's the best way to do this and how can we do it? How can we do it right? And it's been a big learning curve. And I feel comfortable where we've ended up. And I know everybody doesn't feel the same way, but I feel like we've really come to a point where we could find a solution here. And that I feel like in some ways well, anyway, for me, it wouldn't have gotten there without this whole process and having to look at other counties and look at what's going on and look at our rules and regulations. So that's been useful for me, and I hope it ultimately will be for the county council. And the other point is just that I do think that we didn't get a chance. Our mandate was not to look at how to expand renewables in the whole county, but I just feel like we have done a terrible job on other parts of the county, and we need to do better. And as a county, we need to really put pressure on our county council members. And I'm hoping that the industry, you guys will engage and say, these are the things we need to be doing on those 30,000 acres that are out there that aren't giving up, you know, prime farmland and forests and environmentally sensitive areas. There is acreage there. People have been reluctant to take it on and use it, but we're doing it in other places. And I'd like to see our county put their weight behind that in terms of making it more appealing to both homeowners, business owners, and the industry to get solar in every place we can. And I think Doug, you know, the Doug Boucher, the GenOn's a good place, a great place, and I know that GenOn actually has a plan, so that's awesome. But there's all those other places in the county that our potential locations. And I don't know whether, I guess we as a group aren't going to work on that, but I'd like to see, I think that comes out of this discussion that
Well,
there.
sure. Absolutely, Lauren. And I mean, I think if we feel like it in our individual group reports, we may want to, tip our hat to the industry. Should, for example, there should be incentives for these facilities in areas, industrial areas, on rooftops and so forth, that will make it more attractive to them economically to site in those disturbed and built up areas. Right now, those incentives aren't there, and I think that's something the county needs to do. And frankly, I'm shocked. Maybe I shouldn't be, that when there was an opportunity to pass legislation to put solar or renewables as a component on new commercial and residential building in the county, that the county declined to do so. Why are we building anything that doesn't have a renewable component as part of it? Doesn't make sense at all. It's consumption. That's not, that defies what we're trying to do here. So just know that MCA will be in, trying to make sure that we can advance renewables throughout the county, and hopefully be able to work with, I appreciated hearing from Franny and Leslie very much. And hope that we can continue our conversations. And I also will echo the thanks to the group as well. And I know we're all pretty bushed from this process and ready to be done, but it was, as Lauren said, it was a very useful process to help to crystallize some of our thoughts, but also to raise questions that we know we need further answers to. So thank you.
Just a personal reflection. One of the good things that has come with the passage of and signature this past weekend of the COVID relief bill, which is more than a COVID relief bill, is that the investment tax credit, which is probably the largest incentive for both solar and wind development, and there's also production tax credit for wind, which were due to go away, have now been kept at their present level, which is 26% of tax deduction. That's straight dollar for dollar savings for solar and wind projects that are built. So that was going to expire next year, and that is now going to continue. So that is going to be a big help in getting solar built. And just the other thing I'd say is we may actually, I think, all of us now have some contact, but you all probably have anyway, with council members and so on. In my neighborhood, not far from here, between me and Silver Spring, there's a MNC PPC owned facility called Meadowbrook Stables, which is a very lovely middle of the suburbs stable where my daughter took riding lessons many years ago. They're building a very large structure covering a ring with a steel framed structure. And so I wrote to the county today to say, hey, if you guys aren't planning to put solar on this, you should. And again, I think that the action plan that we saw coming out of the county has a lot of we should do this and we should do that, but that you're all right. I mean, we aren't doing it. We've, over a decade, we've only built 110 megawatts of solar in this county. We need actually 2,500 megawatts by 2040. So we got a long way to go. So I think we can all individually and through the connections we have. And again, if Doug, Al, and Randy, if you guys want to talk more about the REAP program, it's widely used in other parts of the country, but for some reason it hasn't picked up here. But there's potentially a lot of support available for farmers to build solar that serves their farms. And many of the farms, I guess, use a lot of electricity. So, there are some possibilities there that are really good incentives. And if there's a way to help promote that with all of your colleagues, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay. And with that said, I'd like to thank you for participating, Randy.
Real quickly, I guess I'll be the odd guy out in this group here a little bit, and it's probably if my daughters are watching this thing tonight, this is the part they're probably the most afraid of, because I'm not the one that's leaving this work group with a warm, fuzzy feeling. I appreciate each and every one of you all that have participated in it. I've learned a lot from all of you, but my frustration level is huge. What the hell is the hurry? Why is this county council on such an accelerated track to approve alternative energy in a zone that has been 50 years in the making? It is imperative to get it right. All of our ideas here and our agendas probably have merits in their own right. The one collective thing that I think most of us can agree to here is solar is good. Alternative energy is good, but it can't be at the expense and the destruction of something so vast. And as we go forward, I worry about some of the timelines. Unlike some of you all, I don't think the earth is going to blow up in 2027 or 2028. I don't think we're going to melt down and not be able to grow agriculture and have it be viable and continue to be able to feed the world, maybe better than we are today. And so I'm glad to have participated, but I have been very frustrated in a holiday season that I just spent consumed by this and the timeline and the time track that it's on. And so thank you very much. I look forward to continue to be able to participate in it and participate with the council. Thanks.
Yes, Doug.
Yeah, in the interest of maintaining the relatively positive vibes that we've had at the end of the meeting, I'm not going to argue with Randy. I would just say that, you know, I'm old enough that I can remember hearing that we should slow down, take more time, study this more since the Bush administration. And I'm talking about the first Bush administration, the late 80s and the early 1990s. And there comes to be a time when you've got to act because the problem is so urgent. And I think that's the case with climate. But I hope as this program goes forward, as the ZTA is passed and projects begin to be developed, that you'll find that the net result is a lot more positive than you anticipated. And, you know, rather than trying to convince you with the arguments, I hope that the history of the next 5 or 10 years or 20 years is going to be the most convincing thing about this. Thanks.
I'm going to just have no comment other than thank everybody for their participation. And I think we did the best we could do, and I appreciate it. And with that, Christina, I really want to thank you for putting this together.
Yep.
Thank you guys.
Thank
So
You
appreciated.
did a fantastic job on short notice. You learned how to do it and you did it well. So I thank you very much. You have been a great asset, and I think everybody could agree with me on that.
Yay.
Well, all right. So then we do. And also thanks to our co-chairs, Leslie and Doug, who worked so well together. Thank you very, very much.
Keeping us organized and civilized. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year to everyone.
New Year all.
And also thank you to the very energetic participants who have been very busy in each meeting. We look forward to reading them. Thanks to all.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, all.
That's it.
Leslie, you and I'll get together soon here. I assume we got to do something between now and
I can't. Oh.
next Monday, I guess.
I think we do. I look forward to it.
Yeah. And
I'm
give me the
glad
hour.
you do.
I'm gonna write up that amendment, but I'll do it in the morning when I'm fresher.
Okay.
I think that's a real good idea, Al, and you're so good at writing this stuff. I mean, Leslie and I'll talk, but you may get called upon.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, happy New Year, Doug.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Christina,
Bye.
again.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
very much.
you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Christina. Bye-bye.
Bye.